Breaking moment alert. This is not a drill. If you're holding XRP right now, you're going to want to give me the next 60 seconds because what's building beneath the surface could shift the entire landscape faster than anyone expects. Something big is converging around October 18th, and if the reports are even half true, this date could mark the first time institutional validation meets XRP's decade of real-world utility. Make sure you like and subscribe this video. It helps get this message to the people who need it most. Now, let's get straight to it. At the time of recording, XRP is trading around $3.12. If you're watching later, that number might have shifted, but the setup, the underlying foundation, is what matters here. And none of this is financial advice. Always do your own research and consult a professional before making any decisions. So here's what's got the entire XRP community buzzing. October 18 is being circled by multiple analysts, community insiders, and even mainstream financial outlets as a potential review window for the first ever spot XRP ETF. That means in plain English that we could be on the verge of seeing traditional financial institutions, the same ones that once dismissed crypto entirely, legally and publicly hold XRP as a regulated asset inside investment products. Before you roll your eyes and think, "I've heard this before," remember this. Every ETF approval in history, from gold to Bitcoin, has redefined how liquidity enters that asset's ecosystem. Gold ETFs in 2004, institutional money rushed in, and the price of gold more than tripled over the following years. Bitcoin's spot ETF approvals earlier this cycle, same story. Liquidity floodgates opened, new narratives formed, and legacy players suddenly called it an alternative investment class. But here's where XRP is different, and why October 18th matters so much. XRP isn't just another speculative coin waiting for hype to lift it. It's already functional infrastructure. We're talking about an asset designed from day one to move value globally, nearly instant, near zero cost, and enterprise ready. While the Bitcoin ETF narrative was about access, the XRP ETF narrative is about integration. Think about that. The ETF isn't the goal. It's the ignition switch for a system that's been quietly maturing in the background for years. While retail investors fought through the noise, Ripple Labs was building relationships with central banks, payment providers, and regulatory bodies across the globe. They secured licenses, built compliance frameworks, and survived every attack the system threw at them. And still, XRP stands. That's why this moment feels different, because it's not built on speculation. It's built on scars, clarity, and infrastructure that's finally ready to scale. If you've been watching the charts, you've probably noticed something subtle. The volume's been increasing, but not just from retail. We're starting to see cold wallet accumulation, reduced exchange supply, and institutional level transfers, all indicators of something positioning behind the scenes. The SEC lawsuit, that was the crucible. The delistings, the uncertainty, the media attacks, all of that filtered out the weak hands and left behind a network of holders and builders who understand what they own. Now that legal clarity has arrived, the conversation has shifted from, "Is XRP a security?" to, "When will institutions start using it openly?" And that's where the ETF comes in. A spot ETF is the most compliant way for major funds to gain exposure to XRP's upside without touching crypto exchanges or self-custody. It creates a regulatory on-ramp for banks, hedge funds, and retirement portfolios, all while driving actual demand into the underlying asset. October 18th might just be the first spark in that ignition sequence. Even if approval doesn't hit immediately, the narrative has already changed. The idea that XRP, once the most controversial digital asset in the US, could become a regulated institutional holding is no longer a fantasy. It's a countdown. And let's be honest, momentum in markets isn't just about numbers. It's about timing. The ETF speculation is colliding with a macro environment that's begging for new liquidity rails. The US debt curve is breaking, interest costs are spiraling, and central banks are hunting for settlement solutions that don't depend on fragile, century-old infrastructure. Ripple's technology, and by extension XRP, was built for this exact moment. So if October 18th does deliver what's being hinted at, we're not talking about short-term price action. We're talking about the start of a structural revaluation, a shift from skepticism to institutional legitimacy. That's the kind of narrative that redefines what's possible for this entire space. We're at the edge of the kind of convergence moment that only comes around once every decade. The silence before headlines, the accumulation before recognition. This is where conviction is built. Because here's the truth. By the time the average investor hears the word approved, it'll already be too late to position early. Here's the thing most people don't realize. ETFs don't create value, they channel it. They're liquidity bridges that transform idle capital into exposure. That's why October 18th is being treated like a potential turning point, not because the SEC waves a magic wand, but because it opens the pipes between Wall Street and the XRP ledger. Think of it like this. Every ETF approval introduces a new current into the system. Bitcoin spot ETF unlocked billions in fresh inflows, not because the tech changed, but because trust did. Now imagine that same process, but applied to an asset that isn't just a store of value, it's a working utility. XRP isn't sitting idle like gold or Bitcoin. It's constantly moving, bridging fiat systems, settling payments, powering liquidity corridors. The ETF doesn't replace that function, it amplifies it. Institutions don't just gain price exposure, they gain a stake in the rails of global settlement itself. This is the part where things get serious. Ripple's escrow model, often misunderstood as unlocking supply, was never about dumping tokens. It was a controlled liquidity mechanism, timed monthly, to ensure orderly distribution and support for enterprise use cases. The same system that critics once mocked is now what gives XRP something most crypto assets lack: predictable supply engineering. And with every month that passes, those released tokens are being absorbed faster. Exchanges are seeing thinner books. Custodians are prepping for client demand. OTC desks are warming up for liquidity events. And the ETF speculation is fanning the flame, because for big players, compliance is the final green light they've been waiting for. But here's where it gets wild. If an XRP ETF goes live, even in pilot form, it introduces a constant buy pressure mechanism. Every inflow, every dollar invested, requires real XRP to be purchased and held in custody. There's no minting, no synthetic paper claim. It's physical settlement on-chain. That's the kind of shift that turns a digital asset from a speculative instrument into a regulated, yield-bearing infrastructure layer. And this is where the market psychology flips. For years, XRP's reputation was the lawsuit coin, delisted, doubted, dismissed. But when compliance meets clarity, narratives die fast. Suddenly, the same institutions that avoided it for risk reasons start needing it for performance reasons. Speed, liquidity, interoperability. That's why October 18th isn't about hype. It's about timing. Even if the SEC drags its feet, the narrative momentum is already doing its job. People are connecting dots. Ripple's acquisitions in custody, their licensing pursuits, their partnerships across banking corridors, all converging into this single question: how long before the rest of the market wakes up? And just when everyone starts thinking it's priced in, that's when it happens. The ignition moment, the flip from narrative to validation. If you are enjoying this content, make sure that you like and subscribe this video. It really helps me get the message to the masses and is greatly appreciated, because the deeper we go, the more you'll realize this entire ETF conversation is just the surface. The real story is what's happening underneath. 60 more seconds of your time and you'll understand why this is so fascinating, so don't click away yet. Everyone keeps staring at the charts, waiting for candles to break out. But the real move is happening underneath the surface, in the plumbing of the market itself. Picture the XRP ecosystem like a vast network of water pipes. For years, the faucets were rusted shut by regulation, lawsuits, and misinformation. Now those pipes are slowly being opened. One corridor, one partnership, one license at a time. The flow hasn't exploded yet, but pressure is building behind the walls. And when that pressure releases, it won't trickle, it'll surge. Right now, we're seeing a shift that only happens before major inflection points. Exchange balances are quietly draining. XRP leaving centralized exchanges for cold storage, DeFi protocols, and institutional custody. That's not retail panic selling, that's positioning. The smart money moves early, quietly, and without fanfare. Think of this phase as the liquidity calibration before the ignition. Retail traders are distracted by meme cycles and short-term volatility, while institutional desks are quietly mapping out liquidity corridors and identifying supply choke points. They understand what's about to happen. When ETFs or structured products enter, they'll need deep pools of XRP for settlement. Those pools must exist before the demand hits. Meanwhile, the psychology on the retail side couldn't be more divided. Half the community still sees XRP as an underdog recovering from the lawsuit, while the other half understands it's already graduated from that narrative. This split is healthy. It's what creates the perfect storm of disbelief that fuels asymmetric moves. And let's be real, markets don't reward the loud, they reward the patient. Every XRP holder watching this right now has lived through the frustration. The FUD, the ridicule, the headlines predicting its death. But look around, every one of those so-called competitors built on hype is now chasing utility. And XRP, it's been utility from day one. Here's the shift few notice. XRP is evolving from a speculative asset into a strategic resource. Banks and funds don't buy coins, they acquire infrastructure. They don't chase volatility, they chase throughput, cost efficiency, and certainty. XRP offers all three. Now imagine this scenario. And stay with me here, because this is where timing collides with psychology. October 18th comes and goes. Maybe there's an approval, maybe there's a delay, but what happens next is more important than either outcome, the recognition phase. That moment when mainstream media begins covering XRP not as the coin Ripple got sued over, but as the settlement layer connecting global finance. That's the point where perception finally catches up to progress, and this right here, this is where everything accelerates. It's when disbelief becomes curiosity, when curiosity turns into conviction, and when conviction transforms into capital. That's the light switch moment most people miss, when the narrative quietly flips from if to when, from doubt to demand, from hesitation to adoption. Because the truth is, the headlines always come after the smart money moves. And if you're watching this, you're already ahead of that curve. Every few years, there's a date that gets remembered. Not because of what happened that day, but because of what started because of it. October 18th could be one of those moments. Not for hype, not for speculation, but because it symbolizes the transition from resistance to recognition. Here's the truth most people won't realize until it's too late. ETFs aren't the finish line, they're the signal flare. The moment that tells the world this technology has matured, that the rails are ready, and that institutions are now stepping onto the field. For Bitcoin, that moment came after 15 years of proving it was a store of value. For XRP, it's happening as the world is actively searching for a better way to move money, right now. Bitcoin will always be digital gold. Ethereum will always be programmable finance. But XRP, it's becoming financial infrastructure. A settlement layer built to power the next economy. One where every transaction, every corridor, every institution connects through the same frictionless bridge. That's why October 18th isn't about whether it's approved or delayed. It's about recognizing the pattern. Every major system shift starts the same way. A spark, disbelief, and then inevitability. You're witnessing the spark. And one day, when the world looks back at this window in time, they'll realize this wasn't luck. It was alignment. The rails were built, the partnerships formed, the liquidity prepared. All it needed was a single moment to ignite belief. So whether you've held XRP for years or just found this video today, remember this. History doesn't wait for headlines. It's written by those who position before the spotlight. This is not financial advice. It's foresight, because the ignition sequence has already begun. And XRP is the spark. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.